For weeks, the Gulf had been holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the war would finally cross a line. That line was not a border. It was not a military base or a naval fleet. It was oil. The massive oil fields of eastern Saudi Arabia, the refineries and storage facilities, supply millions of barrels of crude every single day. Those fields are the financial bloodstream of the Gulf states, and one of the central pressure points of the entire world economy. And on the night this war expanded, Iran fired ballistic missiles toward them. Air raid sirens began sounding across Saudi Arabia's eastern province as radar systems detected incoming projectiles traveling across the Gulf. Saudi air defense batteries activated within seconds, launching interceptor missiles into the night sky. Several incoming missiles were shot down, but the attack marked a dramatic escalation in the conflict unfolding across the Middle East. The targets were not random. They rarely are in modern strategic warfare. The region contains some of the most valuable energy infrastructure on Earth, facilities connected to Saudi Aramco. These installations sit near fields like Sheba and Ras Tanura, which collectively help keep the global oil market functioning. When even the possibility of disruption appears in this region, markets react instantly. Traders remember 2019 when a strike on Abqaiq and Khurais temporarily knocked out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production. Oil prices surged, and governments realized how vulnerable global energy supplies could be if these installations were targeted again. That memory is exactly why the latest missile launches matter far beyond the Gulf itself. The impact is not measured only in physical damage. The psychological and economic shock travels instantly through financial systems. Energy traders begin calculating how many barrels could disappear, while insurance companies reconsider the risks of covering tankers. Governments from Europe to Asia start reviewing their strategic petroleum reserves in case the crisis escalates further. A huge share of the world's energy still passes through the Persian Gulf, either pumped from Saudi fields or shipped through export terminals. Even a temporary disruption can push oil prices sharply upward and destabilize markets already strained by war. But the missiles aimed at Saudi oil fields were not only about economics, they were also about signaling. The message was directed at every country participating in the coalition confronting Iran in the ongoing conflict. Saudi Arabia has been repeatedly warned by Iranian officials that supporting U.S. or Israeli operations could make the kingdom a target. And now those warnings appear to be translating into direct military action across Saudi territory. To understand why Iran would take such a risk, it helps to look at how Tehran has historically approached asymmetric warfare. Iran knows it cannot match the conventional military power of the United States or its allies in a direct confrontation. Instead, its strategy is often focused on threatening the economic lifelines of its adversaries. By demonstrating the ability to disrupt that system, Iran can create pressure that extends far beyond the battlefield. Investors become nervous, shipping routes grow uncertain, and political leaders face the possibility of economic threat. Iran does not necessarily need to destroy major oil fields to achieve its objective. Simply reaching them may be enough. Even limited damage can force companies to shut down operations for safety reasons, compounding pressure on the energy system. Meanwhile, the broader conflict continues to expand. Missiles and drones have struck targets not only in Saudi Arabia but across the Gulf. Airports, military bases, and energy facilities have all appeared on target lists as the confrontation widens. Regional governments are scrambling to reinforce air defenses and coordinate responses with allied forces. Global powers, aware that a prolonged conflict in the Gulf could trigger one of the most significant energy crises in decades. Once ballistic missiles start targeting oil fields, the war is no longer confined to military installations. It begins to threaten the infrastructure that underpins the modern global economy. What happened in the skies over Saudi Arabia was a signal that the conflict has entered a new phase. A phase where economic warfare and military escalation are becoming inseparable. The deeper story behind the missile launches is not just about the physical damage they might cause, but about the strategic message Iran is sending. Over the past several weeks, the conflict has gradually expanded outward, spreading across the Middle East in a widening arc of retaliation. Iranian missiles and drones have targeted multiple Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Oman. The result is a rapidly escalating regional confrontation where energy infrastructure, oil facilities, and shipping routes has become as important as military targets. To understand why Saudi oil fields became a central target, it helps to look at the geography of energy in the Gulf. Eastern Saudi Arabia contains some of the largest oil reserves on Earth. Facilities like Ras Tanura handle enormous volumes of crude every day. When a missile strike threatens these installations, the consequences ripple far beyond the immediate battlefield, triggering global price spikes. That vulnerability is precisely what Iran appears to be exploiting. Iranian military planners have studied the structure of the global energy system for decades. By targeting energy systems, Iran can create a powerful form of leverage. Analysts describe this approach as economic warfare. It is a strategy designed to impose costs so high that continuing the conflict becomes politically and economically unsustainable for regional rivals. Over the past several days, Iranian strikes have not been limited to Saudi territory. Energy terminals and transport networks across the Gulf are under pressure. A missile fired at an oil field carries a different message than one fired at a base. It signals a willingness to disrupt economic foundations. Another important factor is the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world's oceans. Any conflict here raises concerns about a global energy crisis. A significant percentage of global oil shipments passes through this strait every day. Iran has repeatedly signaled its willingness to use its geographic position as leverage, threatening to block shipping routes as part of its strategy. For Saudi Arabia, these launches represent a dangerous escalation. Riyadh has long relied on military alliances and sophisticated air defense systems. In many cases, these systems have successfully destroyed incoming threats. But even advanced defenses cannot guarantee perfect protection against swarm tactics. Saudi leaders must consider the political implications. The kingdom has historically tried to avoid direct involvement in major regional wars. But when missiles target oil fields, the pressure to respond increases. A government that fails to defend its infrastructure risks appearing weak. The war may be entering its most dangerous phase. Each new attack expands the list of potential targets and increases the risk of a larger confrontation. The missiles aimed at Saudi oil fields were signals that the Gulf War is expanding into a broader struggle over energy, economics, and regional power. The missile launches towards Saudi oil fields did not happen in isolation. They were part of a rapidly widening chain of strikes and counterstrikes. These events have been transforming the Gulf into one of the most volatile conflict zones in the world today. Since the beginning of the current war, Iran has carried out repeated missile and drone attacks across multiple Gulf states. The strikes have targeted military bases, airports, shipping routes, and critical energy infrastructure throughout the region. Analysts tracking the conflict say that hundreds of missiles and drones have already been launched, creating a pattern of escalation from Saudi Arabia to Oman. The scope of these attacks illustrates how the war has evolved from a localized confrontation into a regional struggle threatening the entire Gulf security system. Saudi Arabia, because of its economic importance and its alliance with Western powers, has become one of the central arenas of this confrontation. Iranian strikes against the kingdom have targeted multiple locations, including oil facilities, embassies, and military sites across the country. Several drones and cruise missiles have been intercepted by Saudi air defenses, but some attacks have still caused infrastructure damage. These operations show how Iran is attempting to expand the battlefield and impose costs on countries that support its adversaries. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter, and its production capacity acts as a stabilizing force in international energy markets. When those facilities come under threat, the consequences extend far beyond the Middle East, affecting investors and global shipping routes. During previous attacks, oil prices surged almost immediately as markets reacted to the possibility of reduced supply. Even minor damage can trigger major effects, because traders price in the risk of future disruptions to the global market. The real strategic importance lies in the broader economic battlefield. Iran understands that the Gulf's energy system is its greatest vulnerability. If oil terminals and refineries are threatened, the financial consequences can quickly spread through the region, leading to economic warfare. Iran is targeting the infrastructure that underpins stability to make the war politically and economically unsustainable for its adversaries. This strategy also involves maritime control. The Persian Gulf is connected to the world through the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz. A significant portion of the world's oil supply passes through this corridor daily. Any threat here raises fears of a global energy crisis. Iranian forces and allied groups have launched attacks against vessels, causing disruptions that ripple through global trade networks. Shipping companies are reconsidering routes, and insurers are raising premiums for tankers entering the region as the security environment deteriorates. Meanwhile, governments across the Middle East are scrambling to reinforce their defensive capabilities and protect key installations. The United States has increased naval patrols in the Gulf, and regional allies are coordinating to intercept incoming drones. But Iran has increasingly used coordinated swarms of drones and missiles designed to overwhelm defensive batteries. Military analysts warn that such saturation attacks could eventually allow some weapons to slip through the defenses. The conflict has also begun affecting the broader political landscape, forcing Gulf governments to choose sides more clearly. Diplomatic channels that once reduced tensions are under strain as missile strikes and air raids continue across the region. As the war spreads, regional alliances are shifting, and the possibility of additional states becoming directly involved is increasing. Major powers outside the region are closely monitoring developments, aware that a prolonged conflict could destabilize the world economy. Energy prices have already climbed, reflecting fears that production and shipping routes could be further disrupted. Some countries are considering releasing oil from strategic reserves to stabilize markets and find alternative supply routes. All of these factors point toward a dangerous trajectory. What began as a military confrontation is transforming into an economic struggle. Each new missile launch increases the risk that the war could spiral into a much larger and more destructive regional crisis. The attack on Saudi oil fields may represent one of the clearest signs yet that the conflict is entering a new phase. The missiles were not only aimed at physical targets, they were aimed at the economic foundations of the Gulf itself. By the time the missiles aimed at Saudi oil fields were intercepted over the Gulf, the strategic picture of the war had already begun to shift. What had started as a series of military strikes was now evolving into something far more dangerous, a conflict centered on energy infrastructure and economic pressure. The missile launches toward Saudi Arabia were not simply another tactical move. They were part of a much broader campaign conducted across the entire Gulf region. Over the past several weeks, Iranian missiles and drones have struck or attempted to strike multiple countries connected to the coalition opposing Tehran. Saudi Arabia has seen attacks on oil facilities and military bases. Bahrain has experienced strikes near the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. Oman has reported drone attacks on ports and oil tankers. Each incident adds another layer to a strategy designed to spread the war across the region. This pattern reveals something important about Tehran's approach. They are targeting the broader system that supports military operations in the Gulf. That system includes air bases, shipping routes, radar networks, and most importantly, energy infrastructure like oil fields, refineries, and export terminals. By demonstrating that these facilities can be threatened, Iran is sending a message that the war will not remain confined to traditional military targets. The battlefield is expanding into the economic sphere, where damage to energy production can have consequences far beyond the region itself. The war intensified after U.S. and Israeli forces launched large-scale attacks on Iranian military infrastructure earlier in the conflict. One dramatic operation targeted Iran's Karg Island, a primary oil export hub. U.S. forces reportedly struck installations connected to missile and naval operations. Although the oil infrastructure was largely spared, the attack signaled that both sides were now willing to target assets connected to energy security. Iran responded by warning that Gulf energy infrastructure tied to its adversaries could become legitimate targets in the conflict. In recent days, energy infrastructure and shipping routes have come under increasing pressure as drone attacks disrupt operations at oil export terminals. Shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has slowed dramatically. Some analysts describe the crisis as a severe disruption to global oil supply. In response, Saudi Arabia has reduced oil production and redirected exports through alternative routes to avoid the most dangerous areas of the Gulf. The Gulf supplies a large portion of the world's energy, and any conflict that threatens that supply immediately affects global markets. Governments around the world are watching closely because prolonged instability in the Gulf could trigger a wider economic crisis. Energy importing countries in Europe and Asia depend heavily on oil shipments, and a sustained disruption could ripple through many industries. At the same time, the military dynamics are evolving. Each new strike forces governments to reconsider their defensive strategies and alliances. Saudi Arabia and other states are strengthening air defenses, deploying missile interception systems, and coordinating more closely with U.S. forces. But as attacks become more frequent and sophisticated, the challenge of protecting such a vast network of facilities grows more complicated. Oil pipelines stretch across hundreds of kilometers of desert, and export terminals sit along long coastlines exposed to drone and missile attacks. This vulnerability makes energy infrastructure an attractive target. Disrupting a refinery can send shockwaves through global markets and political systems. By targeting the economic foundations of its adversaries, Iran can exert pressure that extends far beyond the immediate battlefield. The broader risk now is that the conflict could spiral into a much larger regional war as more countries become directly affected. Gulf governments may find themselves drawn deeper into the conflict, while global powers may feel compelled to intervene to secure energy supplies. For now, the missiles aimed at Saudi oil fields stand as a clear signal. It is no longer only a struggle over territory. It is becoming a contest over economic survival and energy security. The Gulf's shipping lanes are now central pieces of that contest. The next phase of the war may not be decided only by armies, but by whoever can control or disrupt the energy system that powers the global economy.